All right, welcome to week 9. Moving pretty quickly. Last week of March, getting into the home stretch. So, last week was your CSS exam. Working on having those graded beginning of this week since all midterm grades are due by Wednesday. So, I'll let you know when all of those are posted and you'll be able to check your midterm grade. That grade's only going to include the 2 exams since the participation, which includes homework, is calculated at the end of the semester. But you'll have a good idea of where you stand in the class, and if you need to make major changes to your study habits at that point, you'll be able to do so. So this week we're going to be talking a lot more about site design um, and going into CSS floats, which we've talked about a little bit already, but this will be a little more in depth. And finally, this weekend, I'm going to introduce the Mastery Project. So if you remember from the syllabus, this is a kind of like a coding exam where you show that you're proficient in laying out a website using a lot of the layout concepts that we've been working on. I'm going to introduce it this coming Sunday. That way you have a full 7 days to work on it. It's not timed, so you'll read the prompt and then you'll set up your own project and just work on it. But you'll have an entire week to do it, and then you'll submit it on Sunday. And that'll be next week after we've gone through a lot of this content. So I'll give you the prompt on Sunday. So you'll want to look out for that so that you can get started on it as soon as you can. So this is a big portion of your final grade. It's we when we're in person for this, it's normally an exam, but since we're not, it'll be presented at a project. So, but it's pretty fun. So I hopefully you guys enjoy it. For site design, some of this is just review if you want to read through it, remembering block and inline, how the box model works, positioning. This is a good resource for positioning. Chris Coyer, he's a really great CSS developer. If you've ever found yourself on the CSS Tricks website, that's his brainchild, and he contributes to that a lot. So if you are a little confused on that, I recommend watching this video. He goes over a lot of it and he's a very happy person and it's easy to follow along. All right, so page design. We've talked a lot about the code needed to make a website, but we haven't gone into as much detail about actually designing a web page. Of course, you want to keep the CRAP principles in mind with each decision that you make, but we're going to talk today about some specific approaches that designers take to create effective websites. So one thing to remember is that you can always look at other websites for inspiration. You can make a note about what you think works and what doesn't work in other people's designs. In the end, you're the designer, so try out stuff, see what it does. That's the best way to get good at web development is just experimenting. It's not always going to work, but you'll definitely learn something along the way. So I want to talk about web versus print. If you remember back to our history of the web discussion, you might remember that the early websites were just collections of scientific articles. Basically, they had taken what was normally printed on paper and just copied it into a web page that could be shared. Obviously, this is no longer what the web is limited to. It's not the same as print. You can come up with a beautiful newspaper layout that's pixel perfect, and then once you print it, that's it. It doesn't really change. So you compare this to websites where the content is constantly changing, sometimes triggered by what the user is doing on the site. So you might click a button and then like a modal pops up or some content changes or, you know, it's not static. You can have media like videos in websites, which obviously is impossible in print. So it's a problematic ideal to think of your websites as a final and finished project. So even though we call web pages pages in quotes, they're not the same as a page you might find in a book. So it might be more helpful to think of web pages as an arranged view or arranged content that reflects how you're seeing it at that particular time. It won't necessarily look that way if you visit the site on your phone or even go back to the desktop version a week later. So this is just something to keep in mind. You can always go back and add and remove content. So web pages are dynamic and interactive, and print design is more static. Once you make it once, that's normally how it stays. All right, so page design concepts. Um, Despite all of that, there are a few concepts that we can steal from print design to help us make more effective websites. So we have this idea of visual hierarchy, which is where you emphasize the content on your site that you want everyone to look at first. It's the most important thing on your site. It's where you want to um, drive everyone to look toward. Oh, I lost my place. So content should be arranged locally so you have similar content being grouped together. This might sound familiar to you if you remember our proximity principle discussion, having related content grouped together and having unrelated content moved apart. Visual balance is just having an overall balance between text and visuals. There should be a balance between all the components on your website in order to come up with a cohesive design. You want to be consistent with your color and your typography choices, but if you follow your CRAP principles, you'll be more likely to achieve an effective design or an effective balance. As designers, we have a number of conventions we can follow. So I'll look here. Headers usually contain the site identity, like the logo or the company name. The footer usually contains information about the site, contact information for the organization that the website belongs to. You might see some copyright information, maybe a link to their careers page where they have jobs posted. So you can go look at footer on different sites and just note what you see. We have a bunch of interface elements that we can use, like modals, which are those little windows that pop up, like maybe you click a button and it pops up a modal, or you'll go to a site and there'll be a modal popped up that says subscribe to our newsletter, that kind of thing. We have lists, tables, forms, which we already covered in the class and you will be familiar with. But the point of having these kind of similar interface components is that when people are viewing your site for the first time, they'll see familiar elements and immediately know how to use them. Finally, you want to watch your page lengths and text widths. So if you're on a page and it's very long, there'll be so much content that it'll be harder to find the information that the site was really built to display. If you do have a really long site, you can add a little button that takes you back to the top. You might see that it's like usually down here and it's a little caret or an up arrow, and you can click it and it'll scroll you up to the top. You can also have like a fixed header. So as you're scrolling, actually the sidebar kind of does this. As I'm scrolling, the sidebar is staying in place so that you can still navigate even if you're scrolled really far down on the page. All right. Page layout with HTML. When you're actually making a page layout, you'll want to remember the HTML5 structural elements that we learned, like the header, the footer, the nav, section, aside, all of those. And anything that doesn't fit nicely into one of those, remember you can just always throw it in a div. So divs are useful for grouping related sets of elements that might have a shared padding or margin. One thing to remember is that you can change the window of the browser. So this can break content depending on how you have your container set or how you have your width of your container set. So if I were viewing this site on mobile, I've done some work to make sure it looks okay, but you can see some things changed around and the content is scaling like that. But if I had set a width on here, maybe I set this list here to be 500 pixels wide, and then I make this screen size 300 pixels wide. 200 pixels of that content is going to be cut off. So this is just something to keep in mind. We're going to go over in detail in the future how to actually make sure that this content looks good on all device sizes. It's called responsive web design, and we're going to cover it a lot going forward. So, but it's just something to keep in mind that when you set a width like that, you can break on multiple screens. So there are a few page layout issues that a lot of people typically run into when getting started. You want to keep your lines short to improve legibility. So you can see none of my lines here are stretching the entire page. They're just kind of, this width here to make it a little bit easier to read. You want to set margins, and that if you create that white space, you can help show related content and organize your page. You can do this by making these columns. So you can see I have a 3-column layout here with all this white space in between. Let me see if I can show what it might look like if I took that out. Let's try it. It's not really working. Well, I was going to try to show you, but it's not working. But yeah, if I were to change this to be 0, this would be smack up against here, and it would just make it a little bit harder to see. So this white space that's running vertically like this is called a gutter. And I also have one over here. You can see there's a gutter here and a gutter here, and it just helps me separate this into 3 distinct sections on my page. So you can tell this is all related content, this is all related content, and this is all related content. All right, let's get back down here. Typography. You never know what your text is really going to look like on the screen since the user has final control over the display. So how I might see it might not necessarily be how everyone else sees it, especially if the user has some type of visual disability where they have to make the font size larger. So even if I set my font size, someone might come to the site and immediately make it like 10 times bigger. So I can show you that. So if someone comes here and does something like that where they want to see it, in my case, it still looks okay, but you have to put that thought into it. Get back, that's 100%. So people who might have trouble reading small print might do that immediately. Okay. So we just kind of do our best effort to make it look good on all screens, and a good way of doing this is to just test it a lot on different browsers, different screen sizes, zoomed in, zoomed out, just to make sure it looks pretty good. Finally, mobile. Just remember that sites are no longer just for computers with large screens. They have to work on mobile devices. Again, we'll talk about this in responsive web design. So that's pretty much it for our intro to site design. We'll keep building on this for the next couple of weeks. In this section, I'm just go over a few of the differences between fixed layouts and fluid layouts. I think I talked about this in a previous lecture, and the Duquette book does a great job of explaining that, so make sure you read those sections. I think it's in the 15, 16, 17 chapter region. But basically, fixed layouts have a fixed width set in pixels, and they don't resize when you change your browser window. And liquids, they do stretch and contract as a user changes the browser window. So just make sure you understand the differences between those, and you'll get some practice in the exercises. More CSS, I just show you a few concepts that could be helpful in designing pages, like centering elements, clearing margins and padding, things that'll be helpful in your layout project. And then here I have 2 videos that show, I think 3 videos that just show how to do different layouts, different column layouts. And then you have some exercises where you'll create a site that looks like this. Pretty simple, or something similar to that. It doesn't have to be the same colors, but you're going to be making a fixed layout and you're going to make a fluid layout, and they should look something like this. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, have a good week and look out for the project description that I'll post on Sunday.